Hi everyone and welcome back to a very windy grey garden. It was beautiful sun when I headed out here to start the video. Since then the wind's picked up, some Independence Day style clouds started to come overhead. Kids have started killing each other a few gardens away. The band started playing. I didn't even know we had a band, but it started playing. Basically everything that could go wrong has gone wrong. But I'm here and I'm finally doing a video. And apologies, it's been a long time since I actually last did a video. I wasn't very well a few weeks back. And whilst I'm definitely better now, there's been a couple of weeks of definitely feeling sort of tired really, not having the energy to do pretty much anything after work. So I haven't done anything out in the garden other than water it and have a quick pot around. But it's one of those things really. A lot of the plants are tough, they look after themselves, and despite my neglect, they've all seemed to grow really well. So today I want to show you one of the plants that actually does look great right now. A plant that doesn't need a huge amount of care at this time of year, other than a good watering and the occasional feed. And that's the hardy ginger, which mainly grow for their ornamental flowers, their amazing jungle-like foliage, as well as a really fragrant scent they put out at this time of year. Personally, I grow a few different hardy gingers, and one of my favourites is this one here, which is a Hedychium Gardnerianum. It's one of the easiest to grow, and it's probably my favourite just because I've got some really established plants of it. I bought them a few years ago, and I bought them as quite large rhizomes. I was really lucky, it was an RHS show. One of the sellers had a big clearance tub of them, and they were £5 each for some really big rhizomes, about a foot long. Well, just under a foot, but we'll round it up. Around that size. So by now, a few years later, they form really established clumps, and they part of these flowers reliably every late summer. So a fantastic plant for any kind of jungle or tropical garden, and definitely an alternative or something to go alongside cannas, which although they're fantastic, they're definitely a lot more widely available. So if you want to try something a little bit different, something that people won't have seen when they come around your garden, hardy gingers are a great choice for that. Now, one thing I should probably say is they're different to the edible ginger. Personally, I've never tried eating these. I'm not sure it's the best idea. And a lot of the gingers you can buy in the UK, the varieties of Hedychium, there's other kinds as well. They're not edible plants and they're grown purely for their ornamental value. And that ornamental value, it consists of these leaves, these banana-like strappy leaves, which definitely fit in with the Tetrapanax, gunra, bananas, the Anseti. They really work well with all that tropical foliage. And then when these flowers come up in late summer, early autumn potentially, they really add a fragrance to the garden. It smells amazing on a beautiful, calm, sunny summer's evening. Exactly the opposite of today. The fragrance is absolutely amazing. So you can grow gingers like this in pots, and I think they work really well. Definitely in a big pot. I've got one out the front of the house in a large terracotta pot with a few Coleus dotted around, and now it's started flowering. It really looks the part. It would look the part even more if the Coleus had actually grown a lot this year, but potentially it's not been the best summer for growing a lot of exotics that require a bit of heat to get going, and also the watering might have been a bit sparse the past few weeks. But either way, it looks fantastic in that pot, but equally they'll be perfectly at home in a border. And Hedychiums, like a lot of cannas really, they like a lot of sun, but they like a lot of moisture. And when it's the growing season, you really want to water them a lot. You don't want them to be waterlogged, to be sat in it, but they like a good dose of water and a lot of feed as well. They really like as much as they can of both to get growing really big, get that foliage out and start flowering earlier in the year. They are tough plants, and potentially they would survive somewhere with less moisture, without feeding, and potentially somewhere shaded as well. But in reality, these are plants that flower later in the summer, so personally I think it's better off to give them a little bit more of the water, a little bit more of the feed, and as sunnier sort of sheltered spot as possible to really encourage them to flower before it gets too late in the season. So this is my example here in a pot. I've got one further at the garden in a border as well. And one crucial thing that I've read about Hedychiums that personally I've stuck to myself is to not disturb the clump. So unless you specifically want to divide it, to propagate it, to create more plants, apparently they don't like root disturbance. So whilst I've tried one out in the border this year for the first time, most of my others, I've kept them in pots. This one was originally in a 30-litre pot and now I've moved it up this year, potted it up, and it definitely filled that pot completely. That rhizome has spread and it started to circle round. So they're definitely hungry plants, they're definitely spread, and they definitely build up quite a strong clump over time. But if you're looking to buy one, well, probably this year or early next year, there's a few different ways you can actually grow them. So I know you can grow some varieties from seed. The issue with that is it can definitely be a couple of years or so before they flower, so it might be more of a long-term investment. You can buy them from certain bulb suppliers that I won't mention the names of. You can buy them dried for relatively cheap, but what you find is when they're delivered in spring, you only get small sections of rhizome, and often my sort of personal opinion is that those have been dried out a bit too long, and they really take a lot of heat, a lot of water and a lot of patience as you get growing. So personally, if I was looking to add any more gingers to my collection, what I'd do is actually buy them potted, growing away somewhere. I think Desert Jungle actually stock them. I've had some from Pan Global Plants in the past. There's a lot of different places that sell gingers, and I think if you actually buy them as a plant, whether it's at this time of year, you overwinter it, or wait till next spring, someone else actually got that plant growing for you. They're not massively more expensive, and you don't have that really hard battle of having to keep it in a propagator for 6 weeks, keep it somewhere really warm just to see the tiniest shoot appearing. I think they're a plant that once they've settled in, they do grow quite strongly and quite quickly. It's just getting them going that's a really difficult bit. So personally, my advice would be, if you're wanting to get one, probably buy it as a plant first, and don't waste a lot of money buying them as small dried up bits of rhizome and making your life a lot harder. So in terms of care then, Hedychium, they're very similar to Cannas, and if you haven't seen it yet, I did a video looking at Canna Musa, which is one of the biggest varieties of canna you can grow here in the UK, grown mainly for its tropical foliage effect. Check that video out up there. They're both very similar plants in terms of overwintering and summer care. So like I said, in summer, a good rich soil, plenty of water, plenty of feed, and when I say summer, we're talking from sort of late May, early June through to the end of September. That's their sort of prime season for growing. While it's warm and before the frosts hit, they'll just keep growing and growing, sending up more stems with more amazing flowers. But when it comes to winter, with cannas, I tend to just chop the whole plant down and overwinter it in a pot of compost. I'll keep it on the dry side over winter. Whereas with the Hedychiums, I won't bother chopping them down. I'll leave the leaves growing, they will really slow down, but I'll keep them again in a pot. The one that's in the ground, I'll just dig it up, try to keep that root ball pretty intact, put it in a large pot, put it in a corner of the polytunnel, and pretty much leave it for all winter. As long as I've got a heater in there on the very coldest nights, just to keep it above zero, they should be absolutely fine. Keep on the dry side, and then as soon as temperatures start to pick up in spring, so that could be as early as February, or in the case of this year, more likely about May, as soon as temperatures do begin to pick up, you can just start to water it a little bit more, and it suddenly bursts into growth. Personally, I do tend to leave the old stems on, just because I think if any of the leaves are green on plants like Hedychium, they are feeding the plant, they're feeding that rhizome, and they might help improve the growth rate in spring. But I know some people like to chop them right back down to the ground. Nothing wrong with that, and they should be absolutely fine in that pot. I know a lot of you will be watching this video thinking, I grow them all year round, I can leave them out in the ground absolutely fine, and chances are you should be able to do that. But here in the north of England, things aren't always quite the same. If you live somewhere where the soil's quite damp, quite clayey in winter, then you might have trouble overwintering any kind of rhizome in there. They're more vulnerable to rotting away. But here in the garden, we've got some drier areas, some wetter areas. I won't be taking the risk of actually leaving them out. I know they're very hardy plants, but the other thing is if you leave them in the ground over winter, it's not just surviving the winter, but it's actually getting growing in spring. So what you find is, in general, plants that have stayed out in the ground, they do grow faster and they become sturdier plants, taller plants a lot quicker once they do start growing. But it's that stage of actually getting them growing in spring, that's what really takes the time. So that's why I keep a lot of my cannas, a lot of the Hedychiums in the polytunnel, because it heats up quicker in spring, and that extra heat really gets them sort of surging into growth. They get growing quicker, and they've got some level of protection from the slugs and everything. Whereas if you have those same plants out in the ground, if we have a year like this year where it can be late May before it actually warms up consistently, those shoots, they really take a while to start coming through. They're vulnerable to late frosts. The slugs, if we have a time like this year where essentially it was really cold for a long time, it suddenly rained, warmed up, everything started growing, and then it got cold again. So there was a million slugs around, everything got nibbled, the frost got a lot of stuff. It's a bit frustrating. So if those plants are just kept in your polytunnel, planted out after the last frost, so either mid-May, potentially sort of late May, early June if you're somewhere really north of the country, that's probably the best way of doing it, and I find it's the best way of getting a big plant later in the year. But anyway, I've blabbed on enough. This is what happens if I do a video without any rough kind of script to stick to. Let's just show you those Hedychiums quickly, as well as some of the foliage plants, the tropical plants that I like to grow them with. So in mid to late summer, your Hedychium starts to produce these sort of young flower spikes, and eventually they develop into something like this, and you can see the flower starting to slowly appear there, and then about a week later you get something like this. So they're absolutely incredible, really exotic looking flowers, and even if it didn't have a scent, there'd still be amazing plants to grow in your tropical garden. But that scent as well, especially if you've got a small garden, quite like a courtyard, something like that, is absolutely incredible. It's a really strong fragrance. So absolutely fantastic plants. In addition to the flowers, they've got this amazing foliage too. So if you haven't tried growing Hedychiums, you haven't tried growing hardy gingers, but definitely something that you can really add to your tropical garden. Maybe get one later this year, or maybe wait till next year. But either way, it's something you should really grow alongside cannas, like this one here, which is Canna Russian Red, which although it's been eaten by a lot of slugs or whatever, it's already started flowering. You can see the bit of sunset there. It's already started flowering really well. That's purple, going with the amaranthus here, which is an annual that grow alongside these kind of plants. I actually got those as a gift from someone in the village this year, but they've got really sort of exotic, tropical looking sort of flowers, but definitely fit in with the vibe. And here, around the corner, another flower that I've started growing this year, actually for the first time, shamefully. This is Salvia amistad, which has got a really deep, really rich purple to it. It's a fantastic looking flower, and personally I think all these really striking, all these rich colours work absolutely fantastic together. So that's it for today's video, and it's just a short one in the scheme of things, so thank you very much for watching. It's a short video mainly because Hedychiums are quite easy to look after. They're very similar to Cannas, like I said, and with plants like these, with the summer tropical plants, as long as you know how to look after them in winter, so keep them potted, keep them on the dry side, water them occasionally, and ideally keep them somewhere frost-free like a polytunnel, a greenhouse, maybe a shed or a garage. As long as you keep them somewhere like that, and just keep them occasionally watered. And then in summer, you know how to look after them then, so plenty of water, a good rich soil, plenty of food, whether they're potted or in the ground, you're generally okay. They're tough plants, they're both tough plants. They might take a while to get going in spring, but once it gets to mid-July, once the sort of nighttime temperatures are quite consistently warm, they really get going, they're coming to their own, and if anything, they don't know the frosts are coming, so they really keep growing all the way through to late September, maybe even mid-October. So they're fantastic plants, and you certainly get a lot of plant, foliage and flower for your money. So they're a great choice. And just before I end the video, I just wanted to say a massive thank you to everyone who commented on my YouTube status. I don't know if it's a status, but if you're a subscriber, you can generally see sort of profile updates from channels. Everyone who wished me well when I wasn't feeling very well, the people that took the time to message, I really do appreciate it. And obviously there's some videos that I wanted to put out in late July, early August, which haven't happened, but those I'll try to work them in at a later date when they're more appropriate. There's no point doing a video about watering when half the country's been underwater for the past few weeks, so they'll probably wait till early next year, but there's plenty of other videos I've got planned for the next month. Some interesting bits and pieces here in the garden. The next garden tour video I'm going to do will probably be around mid-September, because obviously I haven't done a lot of progress myself in the garden, but the plants have really grown well in my absence. So I want to do a video then, because it will have been a year since I've been here, so I think it's exciting to show people what realistically you can do in a garden in under 12 months. So I'm really looking forward to that, and I've got a few other sort of really special and hopefully creative video ideas planned. So thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.